After 14 games played, the Philadelphia Eagles officially have the #1 defense in the NFL, and it's not even close, as the Eagles are tied for first with the least amount of points allowed per game, as well as allowing the least amount of yards by over 300, which is basically the equivalent to an entire game played. But the Eagles' dominance goes much deeper than that, as they're the only team this year to allow less than 50 net passing yards in a game, and they've done that twice, once to the Dallas Cowboys and once to the New York Giants. And this was something that's never been done in NFL history, as only 2 teams have ever completed at least 17 passes and netted under 50 passing yards, as the last time we saw a defense this dominant wasn't even in the NFL.
Oh, and it's intercepted by Nakobe Dean!
As the 2021 national champion Georgia Bulldogs were dominant in the same fashion, allowing almost 6 points less per game than the closest team in the country. So what do these two teams have in common? Only about half the defense.
He is now joining Nolan Smith and Jalen Carter and Jordan Davis and Nakobe Dean.
As the Philadelphia Eagles use 5 of their top 8 draft selections in the next 2 drafts to select players from that very same defense. So in today's video, we're going to go over every one of them and explore the connection between the Georgia Bulldogs' legendary defense of 2021 and the Philadelphia Eagles' potential Super Bowl defense of 2024.
You about to spend a whole entire little minute with the Philadelphia Bulldogs.
What does it take to be the greatest defense ever?
Now, before we talk about how great these players have been performing this season in the NFL, we first have to talk about how great the Georgia defense of 2021 was, as many people believe that it might have been the greatest college football defense of all time, and there's plenty of statistical evidence to support that.
They led the nation, averaging just 10 points per game allowed, yards per play with just 4.2. Against Power 5 teams, their 10.5 points allowed per game was best ever, and their 0.7 points per drive was the lowest figure in the playoff era.
And after such a dominant defensive season, there was plenty of awards to be handed out to the Georgia Bulldog defensive players. Starting with Nakobe Dean, who was a unanimous All-American, as well as winning the Butkus Award, which is handed out to the nation's best linebacker every single year. But the defensive player that was the most decorated in 2021 was definitely Jordan Davis, who got the Bednarik Award for the best defensive player in the country, as well as the Outland Trophy, which is awarded to the best college football interior lineman in the country, and he was also unanimous All-American as well. As they went on to win back-to-back national championships, but the 2021 season was special, as they only allowed 153 points all year, compared to 214 in 2022.
The 2021 Georgia Bulldogs gave us the greatest defensive season we've ever seen.
So what changed between 2021 and 2022? The NFL Draft. As Jordan Davis went absolutely viral for his 4.78 40 time.
Holy that moly. Deserves a nice round of applause from the fans here. They just watched somebody pushing 340 run a 4.82.
As his 4.78 40-yard dash time was the fastest time for a player over 330 pounds since 2006, and he was only the 3rd player in combine history to run under 5 seconds at that weight. But his freakish athletic feats did not end there, as he also had a 10'3" standing broad jump, which is believed to be the record for a player over 300 pounds at the NFL Combine. As he finished the Combine with a perfect 10.0 relative athletic score, which is a metric used to figure out the overall athleticism of a prospect, which ranked him as the most athletic defensive tackle in Combine history out of 1,378 defensive tackles from 1987 to 2022, locking in his status as a high first-round pick. And the Eagles were so impressed that they were willing to trade 3 draft picks to move up 2 spots just so the Baltimore Ravens wouldn't get him.
Philly jumped in front of Baltimore. Maybe they saw something from Baltimore. They said, okay, we need to get in front of them.
With the 13th pick in the 2022 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles select Jordan Davis, defensive tackle, Georgia.
His teammate Nakobe Dean was not as fortunate, as he suffered a pectoral strain while training for the draft but declined to have surgery, which means he could not participate in the Combine outside of his measurables, and he was even limited to just doing linebacker drills at his pro day. Despite all this, he was still viewed as a potential first-round pick, as he was garnering comparisons to players like Devin Bush and Pro Bowler Levante David. But ultimately, questions about his size, coverage ability, and the injury he sustained caused him to slide all the way to the 3rd round in the draft.
With the 83rd pick of the 2022 NFL Draft, the Philadelphia Eagles are happy to select a linebacker from Georgia, Nakobe Dean.
The unquestioned leader of an historically great defense. Teammates voted him a captain. Lewis, it's one of the big surprises of this draft that it took this long for him to be picked.
But he wouldn't be the last great Georgia Bulldog defender to slide in the draft.
The University of Georgia football star is accused of reckless driving and drag racing the night fellow player Devin Willock and team recruiter Chandler LaCroix were killed in a crash.
As top prospect Jalen Carter literally had to leave the NFL Combine to go turn himself in Georgia.
He's at Combine, maybe number 2, like top 5 pick.
Potentially, yeah, first pick.
And this coming out now.
He flew back to Georgia. He was arraigned, brought in, flew back to Indy to complete the rest of his testing at the Combine.
I'll be excited to hear what GM's thinking of that.
Which ultimately meant he didn't get to do the majority of the Combine workouts. And to make things worse, he showed up overweight at his pro day by 13 pounds and also didn't look very good in the drills. So while nobody ever questioned his talent, people are now starting to question his decision-making and his effort. But the Philadelphia Eagles ultimately decided that the talent was worth the risk.
They're just the 6th team to have a top 10 pick after reaching the Super Bowl.
As they did the exact same thing they did the previous year, trading up to draft a defensive tackle from the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs defense.
The Philadelphia Eagles select Jalen Carter, defensive tackle, Georgia.
And despite all the questions leading into the draft, everybody seemed to immediately know that this was going to work out.
Oh yeah, Nicole, we're just Georgia North. I just think the Eagles like Georgia, but I'm just sick. I'm just sick to my stomach right now. I'm so shocked. 8 teams let Jalen Carter fall to 9 for this. Come on.
But the Eagles weren't done there, as they still had another first-round pick later in the round, and they had their eye on another Georgia defensive player that completely dominated the Combine with an unbelievable 40 time.
4.44.
I mentioned Hassan Reddick as a comparison. Hassan Reddick ran 4.52. Incredible time for Nolan Smith.
And no matter how great the 2021 Georgia defense was, he followed along in the trend of great players sliding in the draft as well, as a lot of people had Nolan Smith mocked to going to the Eagles at the number 10 pick.
I thought they would take Nolan Smith at 10. Never in my wildest dreams I think he would be here with their 2nd first-round pick.
The Philadelphia Eagles select Nolan Smith, linebacker, Georgia.
I mean,
Go Birds!
the draft just keeps falling to him.
I love Nolan. Like, I've recruited Nolan to Penn State. Like, I was his host. Like, Nolan's my guy. His ceiling is high.
But they weren't done there, as there was still one more Georgia player that was sliding in the draft.
He is now joining Nolan Smith, and Jalen Carter, and Jordan Davis, and Nakobe Dean.
As the Eagles also tried to bolster their secondary with the addition of Kelee Ringo.
It's basically the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs just unleashed.
But the transition to the NFL was not going to be easy, as all these players were joining a team that had Super Bowl aspirations and a very loaded roster to get ahead of. Jordan Davis was a first-round pick, so he immediately saw time in the defensive tackle rotation, as he immediately proved to have the ability to occupy blocks and help in the run game. And this was evident on tape right away, as he had a strong week 1 performance against one of the best offensive lines in the entire NFL in the Detroit Lions, as he was doing exactly what he was drafted to do: stop the run. But his strong start to his NFL career was slowed by a high ankle sprain that landed him on injured reserve for 4 weeks. And even though the Eagles did make the Super Bowl, his contributions faded, and people started to question if his conditioning was where it needed to be for a 17-game season.
Physically, I mean, it's coming along. It's always a work in progress.
Nakobe Dean had a much tougher time coming off of a serious injury and being a 3rd-round pick, while also playing behind one of the best inside linebackers in the game in TJ Edwards, who was quickly turning into a Pro Bowl caliber linebacker and the leader of the defense, which meant that Nakobe Dean didn't start a single game in his rookie season. The following season, after making the Super Bowl, TJ Edwards left to join the Chicago Bears.
TJ Edwards is, one of those guys I think we were talking about along the lines where he's a really good player that gets lost in the shuffle of a bunch of stars on that Eagles football team, right?
And many thought this would be his chance to lead the defense. But after winning the starting spot in camp, he hurt his foot in the 3rd quarter of the season opener and was never the same player throughout the rest of the year. He missed 4 games, and although he eventually came back to start 4 more, he was never close to healthy, and the Eagles eventually shut him down halfway through the season, officially now only having 4 games started in his first 2 years as an NFL player. as he had many people wondering if he was going to be a bust. After the collapse of the 2023 season, the Eagles made a lot of changes by hiring a new defensive coordinator, Vic Fangio, as well as 2 new linebackers in the form of an unknown player in Zach Bond and a former All-Pro in Devin White, which had a lot of people wondering what the Eagles thought about Nakobe Dean.
So, after continually being slotted as the third guy on the field behind Devin White and Zach Bond, Nakobe's confident that he's putting the right tape out there.
I mean, of course, I want to play.
But he had a strong enough training camp and preseason to not only start, but to earn the green dot on the back of his helmet, which means that he's the one calling the plays in the huddle, as Devin White would be a healthy and active for the first 4 games before eventually being let go, as the Eagles had clearly found their starting middle linebacker. Nolan Smith also had a hard time finding his way onto the field behind a very deep edge rotation, as he also didn't start a single game his rookie year either, and he only got 1 sack despite being a first-round pick, while Kelee Ringo had an even steeper hill to climb, being behind Pro Bowlers like Darius Slay and James Bradbury. But he was called to start later in the season due to injuries, and he showed that he could play by getting a game-winning interception against the New York Giants, securing their only win out of their last 7 games.
Tossed by Ringo!
But the one player that made an immediate impact right at the gate was Jalen Carter, as future Hall of Fame center Jason Kelce made headlines for his first impressions of the rookie in training camp,
saying he felt him make a drastic inside move, referencing the insane natural strength of the rook, and the O-line are definitely talking about him.
And it wouldn't be long before the rest of the league was talking about it as well, as he went on to have a Defensive Rookie of the Year caliber season, ultimately falling short to Will Anderson of the Houston Texans, who only had 1 more sack despite the fact that Jalen Carter was double teamed at almost twice the rate. And due to poor coaching and a lack of production from these young players in their first season, the Eagles defense finished towards the bottom of the league in pretty much every statistical category. And they also didn't have a very good offseason, as they lost future Hall of Fame defensive tackle Fletcher Cox to retirement.
Well, today's the day.
And the team's leading pass rusher in Haason Reddick, who forced his way out of town by requesting a trade.
To the New York Jets.
As the Eagles' 2024 season started with an omen in Brazil, as 9 of the 2021 Georgia Bulldogs were on the field at the same time, as they played the Green Bay Packers, who also drafted 4 starters from the same defense in college. And now the Eagles had the youngest defense in the league and were also learning a new scheme. There was definitely a lot of growing pains, as they dropped 2 out of their first 4 games while learning the new system, with the worst coming as another blowout loss to the Buccaneers, the same team that ended their season the previous year in the playoffs, which had everybody in the media thinking that the sky was falling again like it did the previous season. But the Eagles coaching staff and players were just focusing on getting better,
putting ourselves in position to win, coming out of the bye week, and then I'll be worried about the Cleveland Browns.
And get better they did, as the Eagles defense didn't allow a single touchdown against the Browns, while they started to see more meaningful contributions from the Georgia Bulldog players. Nakobe Dean led the team in tackles, while Jalen Carter and Nolan Smith Jr. both led the team in sacks with 1 apiece.
There's the second 3 and out.
This was just the beginning of their newfound pass rush, as the following week saw the Georgia Bulldog players get 5 total sacks by themselves against the New York Giants.
The 30 by Nolan Smith Jr.
2 from Nakobe Dean, 2 from Jalen Carter, and 1 again from Nolan Smith Jr.
Nakobe Dean.
But the Giants and the Browns don't necessarily have the best offense, so a lot of people are still skeptical of how good this defense really was. The following week, though, would definitely be a good measuring stick, as they are facing Joe Burrow and the #1 passing offense in the entire league at the time of the recording of this video. And despite going right down the field and scoring on the first drive,
He's got him! Touchdown!
the Eagles defense would eventually tighten up, only allowing 17 points in the entire game to the 6th best offense in the entire league, as Nolan Smith would chip in another half a sack and Nakobe Dean would get a forced fumble that essentially put the game away.
And the ball pops free.
As Nakobe Dean is quickly showing that he was just as dominant of a playmaker as he was in college.
We the fucking dog, and this our dog park, and we don't do no barking. We just motherfucking bite.
And he did it the following week with the game on the line, as the Jacksonville Jaguars were driving with under 2 minutes to go, needing a touchdown to win the game.
We might get that red zone. Running back, stutter go. Yeah. I've been waiting for it all week.
As nobody questioned Nakobe Dean's work ethic, but they did question his coverage ability, until this game, that is.
Pass time, looking for Johnson, and it's picked off! Nakobe Dean!
And Nakobe Dean called game to preserve the victory.
I got another Jordan before I tell him about the Chinese.
The following week, they held the Dallas Cowboys to under 50 yards passing despite completing 17 passes, which had only happened once in NFL history prior to that, and that was 3 weeks ago when the Eagles played the New York Giants, as they now became the only team in NFL history to not only do this once, but twice. And they did it in the course of a month. And this team's success is largely due to these exact same Georgia Bulldogs. And Nakobe Dean is currently 5th in the entire NFL when it comes to solo tackles, while also adding 3 sacks, 1 forced fumble, and is currently tied for 4th best in fumble recoveries with 2 as well. While Jalen Carter's had an impressive season with 4.5 sacks, but those stats don't nearly show the type of dominance he's had as a player, as he's the one drawing double teams on just about every single pass play.
So everybody knows that Jalen Carter is one of the best defensive tackles in the NFL,
as he's having a Defensive Player of the Year caliber season, while Jordan Davis is the player who's getting double teamed on most run plays, and Nolan Smith has recently turned into one of the Eagles' best pass rushers, having sacks in the last 2 games, giving him 6.5 on the season, which is up from 1 the previous year. And the scariest part is that this defense is only going to get better, as they literally have the youngest defense in the NFL and a championship pedigree, which means this is going to be one of the best defenses in the league for a very long time. So I'm going to end the video there, but if you guys like what you saw and want to see more, please make sure to be a subscriber, because as of right now, I can only make videos up to 15 minutes long, and I'd like to make videos a little bit longer so I go more in depth. So please subscribe so I can meet the threshold, and other than that, thanks for watching.